Welcome back, everybody, to Discussing a Murderer. This is Jeff Jones, and with me today is the panel, and I will go in reverse order as usual. Hey, Big Jeff, how are you doing?
Hey, Jeff, great to be here. Doing great.
Appreciate that. Jeff is in a little bit of a transition, so you're going to be on the road right now. And so it's great to have you with. Thanks for making the effort, Jeff, and Dr. Silkman.
Thank you very much for inviting me back. We must be doing something good. Hello, everyone. I'm from Adelaide, South Australia. Beautiful day today.
Thank you, Dr. Silkman. And Kelly.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me back. I'm from Western Australia. It is overcast, but it's still sunny as hell.
Awesome. Yep. And it is a blue sky day here today in Hawaii in the mid 80s. And here I am inside. But that's okay because I'm excited to get back to this podcast. We finished episode 1 of Making a Murderer on the last episode. And so we'll be starting a fresh episode today.
Hello, this is Teresa with Untitled Chapter magazine. I'm a photographer, and I'm just giving a call to let you know that I could come out there today in the afternoon. It would probably be around 2 o'clock or even a little later. Again, it's Teresa. If you could please give me a call back and let me know if that'll work for you. Thank you.
Well, that was a pretty infamous call right there. That's probably worth chatting a little bit about.
You know, I was thinking the same thing, and I didn't know if you guys were ready to stop it after 49 seconds, but why don't we go through that phone call, that message that was left by Teresa Halbach. Jeff, did you have something?
Sure, I'll start. I'm sure there's a lot to say. I think the narrative is that as it's going to be exposed, that Stephen called Auto Trader on Monday morning to get an appointment with the photographer who he knew was going to be Teresa Halbach. She was at the property several times in the order of teens. I think it might have been 12 or 13 times before this. And he was well acquainted with her schedule. So he knew the day to call, and he called on Monday morning and said, came out. He gave as he did when he sold cars for his relatives in the past. He'd give the name of that relative. In this case, he was selling a car for his sister Barbara, whose last name, her married name at the time, was Yonda, and he gave the name B Yonda. And that's not the first time he gave that name either. And he called Auto Trader in the morning. And, a lot of people question as to why Teresa Halbach needed to call him back for directions, because she'd been there to the Avery salvage yard before. So I think that's it's maybe she just had a brain cramp that day. But one of Kathleen Zellner's points in some of her briefs was that the loop must have been closed somehow for her to figure out where to go, because no one from the property ever got back to her, through anybody's known phone records as to how she found out where she was really going. So I think the story is that she actually called Auto Trader, and Auto Trader told her where to go, and then she said, "Oh yeah, I know how to get there." So I think that it's a little bit mysterious as to why she called in the morning and left that voicemail there, given that she'd been there so many times and even under that name, and the address being Avery Road. It's just one of the many mysteries within the mystery. Over.
So I just want to close that gap, because since Kathleen did write that initially, it all kind of has came out. It was a fax. The fax came from Dawn when she came back from lunch from Auto Trader around, I think, I can't know the exact date because I don't know the time because I'm looking at it, but it was after 12 o'clock, just before Teresa leaves. So you see a phone call from Teresa to Auto Trader at 11:45 or somewhere between there, where she speaks to, I think, Angela, and says, hey, I've got this Beyonder, I need the address, can someone send it? And she's like, Dawn's on lunch, when she gets back she'll send it to you. And then you see the fax come in after 12 o'clock, and that on that we've got the actual fax. It's time stamped. It shows it's come from Auto Trader, and it's got Beyonder with the salvage yard. And I think that's why we don't see her then looking up any ways to like get there, because she then had worked out, oh, I know where that is. So, and that would make sense for the fact that this phone call, a lot of people used to believe that this is actually the Zipper's phone call that they swapped, but that doesn't now make sense, because she was calling the Beyonders, because at that stage she hadn't got that fax and that confirmation from anyone to say that that's where Beyonder resided, was this salvage yard. So she was trying to call them first before she got to the Auto Trader fax update. So it all kind of ties in. So Kathleen in the very beginning was trying to create, I think, like a Denny link where someone from the house contacted her, but that's why I don't think we see it like developed anymore from there, because she then realized, hang on a minute, the contact was made by fax, not by telephone, not by someone on the property. It came from Auto Trader. But she kind of has left that open for people to interpret it any way they like, so to speak. But we do have a physical documentation from Auto Trader after midday when Dawn comes back with the salvage yard address on it.
I'd never actually heard about that fax before, so I'm glad you closed that loop for me. Thank you.
Yeah, it's actually in MAM 2. They put up a copy in MAM 2. This is when Ken Kratz is starting to come up with the theory of Teresa being lured to the property.
Just about that though, I had a discussion with a few people last night, and we were on a call for about 5.5 hours, and we were just talking case, and we were trying to find patterns of Teresa and how she does, Auto Trader on the Monday, and when she's going to Stephen's, and what's the pattern with Stephen. I think Ken kind of based that off the luring thing, because this isn't saying that Stephen Avery is guilty, but I will admit this part of Stephen's behavioral pattern is a little bit weird, because the day that he calls Teresa, he said he was calling to see initially at the 2:24 timeline, was because he was seeing how long she was going to be, and that's when he used the infamous *67 to hide and block his number. Everyone's like, and I agree, he wasn't luring her, because if he was luring her, he would have just called her originally and made an appointment with her directly, where there was no paper trail of Beyonder and Auto Trader. He would have completely sidetracked that and went straight to the source herself. The thing is though, in all of Stephen's contact with Teresa on every other day that she's ever come there, he's never called her ever to see where she's going to be. And the other thing is, we thought, we didn't think that it was interesting, but we just highlighted it, that Teresa wasn't late for Stephen. So he always said she came between 2 and 3, 2:30 and 3. So him calling her at 2:24 to see where she is wasn't like she was outside of the timeline that she would usually rock up. So him calling her, okay, it's the first time he's ever done it on an appointment with her, and it's the first time he's ever used it to block his number from her. Not saying that Ken Kratz is right in his luring, because it still doesn't make sense, but in terms of pattern, it is different. It was a different pattern for Stephen as well that day. Out of all days, that day was different.
Yeah, if we could just amplify on what Kel said, as working for Auto Trader, there's two ways that Stephen could have employed Teresa to take pictures of that car. One way is the way he did it, calling up Auto Trader and said, "Can you please send somebody out to take a picture of my car?" A second way that he could have done that was he could have contracted the photographer directly and said, "Hey, can you come take a picture of my car?" and kept Auto Trader out of it. And that mechanism they refer to as a hustle shot, right? It means that she's just on the road and can she come and do it and work it into her schedule, a hustle shot. When it's done like that, the photographer actually makes more money. So if you were trying to, sort of hide, lure somebody or not leave an electronic trail, would it make more sense to arrange a hustle shot on, some other line or something?
Well, I mean,
why,
think about it. Like,
yeah.
You would wait until she came for a legitimate, and at least in my mind, a legitimate shot, come finish this van, and then say, "Hey, you mind coming back tomorrow or later today? I got another car." Or do you, and then having set up an appointment that's off the books. Wouldn't that make a lot more sense if you were trying to hide your intentions?
It would absolutely make more sense to make it off the books. That's the way I think about it. Over.
Well, if I could just add, the way it was done, it's all on the books, right? Everything, there's a record of it. He phoned up Auto Trader. There's an actual record of it, of the appointment. His family, Bob Yunda, knew that they were going to be selling a van, so people knew about the van. So in other words, Stephen didn't do anything in an overt manner, right? Everything was done overtly out in the open. It wasn't done covertly, like you said, Big Jeff. If he was going to do this, for a start, he probably wouldn't do it on his own property. He'll organize some type of hustle shot in some type of remote location using the guise of, look, I've got an end loader or I've got a vehicle and this, can you come out and photograph it? He's not going to do it literally in his backyard. Just an opinion, of course.
Right. And, what good is a Star 67 going to do you when all of this stuff has been documented? It's not going to do you any good. It's not going to hide anything. If this is your intention, is to kill this woman, Star 67 is not going to somehow magically give you an alibi.
Well, it doesn't help him anyway because she didn't even pick up. So he didn't even make contact. He used it, but they never even had a conversation. She didn't
another
even
point
answer.
I was going to make. How do you know she's even going to take the call?
Yes, Steve. On one of the jail calls, Stephen actually makes the comment to his family. If you have a good number, you block it. Stephen is afraid of getting incoming calls. In those days, you were billed for incoming calls, right? That's another thing that's important to remember, right? Somebody picks up the phone and calls you, you get billed for the airtime. That's just the way it worked back then, if you remember. And blocking your number prevented people from calling you back and getting you charged bills, right? And he makes that comment in one of the jail calls. AC Rookie actually tweeted about that, months and months ago when we first got the phone calls, the bulk of the jail calls, and it points to the exact call. If you got a number, you block it, so you protect it. So I think that's one of the reasons why he did that.
Super interesting. I was not aware of that. Thanks, Jeff, and thanks, AC Rookie.
Yes. And the other thing, of course, is that most people in Wisconsin knew who Stephen Avery was, right? Because he was in the middle of a civil lawsuit, and he would have appeared on the news almost daily. So it's not like it's someone that no one knows. And I believe that I have to double check this, but I think that Teresa also knew about the civil lawsuit and the fact that he had been in the news. So it's not like she's being blindsided going to a place that she hasn't been there before. And if you have a look at the photographs that she's taken of vehicles on that property, she's actually taken photographs down in that area where Stephen's garage is, right? So she's been down that gravel road. She's also taken pictures of cars at the front because they often have cars displayed at the front as well for sale. So she has been down that gravel road before. No mystery, No big deal.
What's the I die? 1:31. I'm gonna die tomorrow. I don't think I will. I think I have a lot more to do. I just want to know, whenever I do die, I just want people I love to know that whenever I die, that I was happy. That I'm happy with what I did with my life.
For 18 years, Stephen Avery was limited in everything he did after being convicted for a crime he didn't commit. Now state lawmakers want answers as to why this happened to him.
While in prison, Avery's wife divorced him. Following his release, he lived for a time in an ice shanty.
Stephen Avery is now back home, but for 18 years he sat in prison for a sexual assault he did not commit.
Avery says he forgives the woman for accusing him of the crime, but will never forgive Manitowoc County law enforcement.
Guilty. That's all they think is the guy's guilty right away. So they should look into things more.
Stephen was becoming like a celebrity in the criminal justice system. Politicians were posing for photo ops with Steve Avery. Politicians from the governor down to a state legislator who would be a prime mover in the Avery task force.
An innocent man was taken from his home, taken from his family, accused of crimes he did not commit.
It was rough, the whole 18 years. But I had to do it day by day to keep going.
Something had to be looked at to see how this happened and use that maybe as a catalyst to look at more than just that case from 1985, but the whole system as a whole. What kind of reforms get us closer to truth and justice in the system? I chair the Judiciary Committee, so I started to develop a task force with an eye towards how can we prevent this type of thing from happening again.
My family stuck around for a while, and it was hard. So then I told the old lady to leave. That was the hardest part.
Everyone on the assembly floor, if I recall, stood up, gave him a standing ovation, for what he had to go through, and their own kind of, I'm sorry for what happened to you from the system. People on the task force, people at the committee hearings, every one of them is sitting there thinking, what if that had been me? What if that was my children that I didn't get to see or play ball with or read books to at night for 18 years?
Not a day goes by that I don't think about Mr. Avery, his family and friends, and the suffering they endured. And when it was time to leave, I said, Steve, could I give you a hug? And he just grabbed me in a big bear hug. And I said to him, I'm very sorry, Steve. I'm so sorry. And he said, it's okay. It's over.
Okay. So, very often in U.S. politics, what you see in, the halls of political power, for example, the Wisconsin State House, what you see is a lot of fighting between the left and the right. The Republicans and the Democrats, political left and the political right. But very often, in very rare circumstances, things happen that cause those parties to unite. And when something like that happens, and sort of that, level of political will, this thing, going on TV, and there's nobody who's against Stephen Avery at this point. When that, you create this big hammer, right? And this big hammer is just dying to whack somebody over the head. And that somebody was going to be, the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office, perhaps Tom Kasurek and perhaps Dennis Vogel. So we talked about in a few episodes ago of the possibility of the unraveling of the power structure. And that's really, sort of the big hurt, almost more so than the money, right? Is this sort of the that power structure of the corrupt small town sheriff's office, and there you see it. I mean that fact that politicians are lining up to get their pictures taken with Stephen Avery, the formation of the Avery bill, that is some serious political power lining up to right a wrong. And that was not going to end at just forking over Stephen some wrongful conviction dollars. That was going to come with some serious opening up the light onto the cockroaches. So that was something that needed to be stopped over.
I think it's a good point. One thing that I noticed was that they said that they were going to look at things statewide, and so it wasn't just going to be just about Manitowoc County or just about this case, that it had far-reaching ramifications.
And I just want to echo what Big Jeff said. This is a rare case, I think, whereby you have unilateral support from all sides of the political divide, and you're correct. The mere fact that Gundrum, I think is his name, they wanted to open this up further than just what happened to Stephen in 1985. It really would potentially have set off a bomb. And so now not only are you looking at the injustice done to Stephen, but potentially you're looking at old historical cases. And eventually they're going to go to the doorstep of Kacerik and his fellow officers during the period where he was in power. And so what will happen is, of course, the spotlight will be directly on him. So you can see that the wheels in motions that were being set, this was going to be huge.
And there was no ducking it. That's the thing, right? Yeah, the sheriff's office can avoid discovery, as evidenced by the new calls, the new radio calls that you're just releasing now, Dr. Silkman. But there's going to be no ducking this if the state attorney general gets involved and starts saying, "You're going to show me this."
Correct. Once you get the full picture of what's happening, you could tell that the wagons were starting to circle around Stephen pretty early on in the murder of Teresa Halbach. So it's listening to those calls are very interesting indeed. Correct. But the other issue, of course, that we got to keep in the back of our minds is that not only would the MTSO be further examined and scrutinized, but the state crime laboratories will be opened up for scrutiny, right? Especially old historical cases that used very dodgy forensic evidence like hair analysis, right? So keep that in the back of your mind. It would have had a huge impact on the state.
Everything was going good. I was working by the yard, trying to do my best, stay out of trouble, and just live happy. The best thing, probably when I met Jody, then I felt that I could be loved again, and I could love somebody again, and have a future again.
The clarity of this situation. There are lots of situations where people don't talk about compensation or whatever because it's not clear that they didn't do it. You just know that there's not enough that you can keep them in prison. But this was so clear, and the circumstances so troubling, I think, to most people in the state. And I wasn't familiar with the statute on prisoner compensation for being wrongfully convicted. And they said $5,000 a year, $25,000 cap. And I just kind of scoffed. And I said, my goodness, it should be $25,000 a year. And that's where $450,000 came from.
I went out to the yard many times to see Steve, see if he was all right and adjusting and what's going on in his life and things like that. And he says, right now, I want to be by my parents. I want to work in the yard. I want to try to fit in. I think he felt that when he got out of prison, if he would have left the state or even ran up to Crivets and head out, I think he thought that Manitowoc County was forcing him to do that. And he wasn't going to let anybody run him out of town. You know, he was going to stay here and try to get some of his life back. And I think he wanted Manitowoc County to see that he was getting his life back.
Stephen Avery spent 18 years in prison for something he didn't do. Today marks 1 year since Avery went home free. His time spent out of prison has been with his family.
It feels real good. Yeah. We can all be together again.
He's never since spoken with the people who put him behind bars.
Is there any way you can forgive him?
I doubt it. They knew they did wrong.
He and his lawyers plan to file a lawsuit seeking damages. Avery says money will help him get back on his feet, but it can never make up for lost time.
The lawsuit, from Stephen's perspective, and this is based on what he said to Penny Bernstein at the hearing in front of the Avery Task Force, was really about, he didn't want what happened to him to happen to anybody else. But he also didn't want what happened to her to happen to anybody else. And it clearly had, because of what Gregory Allen did while Stephen Avery was sitting in prison.
The essence of the civil suit says that the district attorney and the sheriff were obliged constitutionally to turn that exculpatory evidence about Gregory Allen over to the defense. It's not a subtle lawsuit in that this is a gross constitutional violation. We've alleged $36 million in damages, $1 million per year for the years that he spent in prison, and then the other $18 million for penalty damages or deterrence damages.
From Stephen's perspective, it couldn't have had less to do with what the numbers were. It was entirely about, let's identify who did what here. Let's make sure that they are held up as examples to everybody else in law enforcement as to what you do not do and what the consequences are when you do what you should not do. What we're really talking about is accountability.
Trying to prevent another family broken so it don't happen again.
Yeah, so for just to tie it into what we were talking about last week, that note on Gregory Allen attacking a woman in the same place was in the case file, right? And we talked about how Penny Bernstein went with Manitowoc County Police Bergner and talked to Kasurek. To say it wasn't. Now, do you think Kasurek would have been obliged to write a report about that when you have a visit like that? Isn't that worthy of a report that should be turned over to the defense? That's something you just ignore.
My understanding is that he denied that it ever took place.
Not quite. He didn't. He said he didn't recall it. He said he didn't recall it. I guess that's the same as denying, but
yeah, I do not recall. Correct. And the important point here is that clearly this was going to be a watershed moment for the state. You can see all the legislators, you can see all the politicians, law enforcement officers. This was going to be a huge test case, and it was going to be potentially extremely damaging and embarrassing for the likes of Kasurek and Vogel. Correct.
Bergner didn't deny going to see Kasurek, but somehow it never made it into Deb Strauss's report that Penny Bernstein accompanied him. So I know that's shocking. I know that's shocking to you, but that's what happened.
Correct.
I think from both sides that this money figure, although enticing our imaginations, I think that it was more about pride and it was about reputation than it was about the money. And I think that Stephen really just explained that clearly in the last clip.
Yeah, I don't believe it had anything to do with the money. I think the total that they came up with, Stephen probably could have ended up with between 3 and 5 million. I think is a figure that's been bandied about. I don't think it's really to do with the money. It's to do with, making sure that if you're going to be accused of something like a violent rape, you got to be damn right, because as we saw, Stephen lost everything. He lost his wife, he's lost his kids, he lost a lot of time with his family and friends. He's labeled as a sex predator. It's a horrific price to pay, but it's not an error. And I think Big Jeff will back me up on this. It's not an error. This is the whole problem. The issue here, guys, it is deliberate targeting, knowing full well that there's another individual by the name of Gregory Allen that has the perfect MO for what happened to Penny, and it was ignored. That's the reason why I think Stephen pushed it so hard with his civil suit, to teach these guys a lesson, to say, hey guys, clean up your act, otherwise it's going to happen again.
Yeah, I agree, Dr. Silkman. There's a saying in law enforcement that says the process itself is part of the punishment, right? And this Stephen was actually turning the tables. It's very painful to go through a process like he went through, being convicted for that, and now look what he's doing, right? He is putting people like, see Judy Dvorak, you see her picture right there. She's getting put through the process, getting put through the ringer, getting videotaped in a very uncomfortable situation. Obviously doesn't want to be there, but that process in and of it is part of Stephen's punishment of these people, right? To make them say what they did, culminating perhaps in this money, but having to admit or to lie and potentially face perjury charges is really, I think, an important part of the process that Stephen needed to go through to help heal himself of this 18 years.
100% correct. And don't forget, all these guys in the depositions, they had attorneys sitting right next to them, often 2 or 3 of them, advising their client to respond or not respond. And the other important point was that Stephen and Jody actually attended most of the depositions. So you could imagine being Stephen sitting there and listening to the likes of Dvorak and other people that were deposed. It truly would have been mind-blowing for them.
I was just going to say, probably infuriating them, right? Making them even more angry to have to look across the table at Stephen and go, oh, just getting angry, but more by every question they ask. And every time they know they've done something wrong, just getting more angry. And I think it's important to portray that building of animosity at this point. Correct.
And the important thing, sorry, Big Jeff, the important thing is, remember, these guys all gave statements because the investigators asked them, what had happened. So they had no idea they were going to be deposed. So they gave honest answers in their statements. And now the civil suit attorneys for Stephen are reading back their own comments. How embarrassing for them now to say, I don't recall, even though it's written in black and white. So yeah, you're right. It is extremely embarrassing for all of them.
Yeah, so the reason that there were so many attorneys there, as you pointed out, Dr. Silkman, was because both Kasurek and Vogel were individually named. Both of them had their individual attorneys at the depositions. So even though here Judy Dvorak was being deposed, Kasurek and Vogel would have had their individual private attorneys there, as well as the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office, who was being individually named in that suit as well, would have had an attorney for them. And in some
Yes.
cases, depending upon who was testifying, they might have even had yet another attorney. For example, when Deb Strauss and Amy Lehman gave their depositions, there was an attorney for the Wisconsin Department of Justice there. And for the case of Deb and Amy, they let that attorney be their own personal attorney as well. So there's like, 4 or 5 attorneys there, depending upon whether the individual brought their own individual attorneys. Just a
Correct.
large, that tells you how afraid they were of this.
Yes, it was a large congregation, that is for sure. And remember, to have the attorneys of those like Kosarik and Vogel who weren't deposed just yet, those attorneys obviously can get the heartbeat of what's going on in the civil suit deposition, right? In order to forewarn both Kosarik and Vogel. So, was a huge delegation of people in there.
Imagine being a law enforcement officer being asked about questions that another law enforcement officer asked you under oath and saying, I don't recall. It's mind-blowing to me. This is not just a normal person taking questions about what did you do. This is, there's a couple layers here. You were asked by another law enforcement agency these questions. This is how you responded. What do you have to say about that? Oh, I don't recall. Mind-blowing.
Yeah, it truly is. I think it also shows a great sign of disrespect for the victim here. Sorry, for the victims here, because Gregory Allen continued his craft for an additional 10 years. So the potential fallout from this was going to be huge. But if you want to read a deposition who has a world record of I don't recall, just have a read of Mark Rora's deposition. About 90% of it is I don't recall. Literally, I don't recall.
Yeah.
Look at the deposition of Amy Lehman. You can actually see Dennis Vogel's attorney, objecting to some of the things that the other defense attorneys say. And it's pretty clear that he was, trying to distance himself from some of the things. So there's a lot of speculation as to whether or not, Vogel was getting, cold feet with regard to the, what was going on, and maybe he was, perhaps going to throw Kosarik under the bus, right? Kosarik is basically is the one, and this is also in Deb Strauss's deposition. People reported to her that Kosarik told Vogel, "Don't fuck this one up." Was Vogel going to admit to that pressure? Greasebox said Vogel knew, and Vogel knew. Why did he go through it? He went through it because he was getting pressured by Kosarik. Kosarik had that level of power to put that level of pressure on the DA to convict a person that person knew was innocent. So,
correct.
It's an interesting dynamic that went on between the attorneys. If you read those depositions.
Description of her assailant at the hospital that night. Did you say that it sounded like Stephen Avery?
No, sir.
Later on that evening, you made that statement. Is that right?
Object to form.
You may answer.
I do not remember if it was that evening or possibly at the sheriff's department.
I mean, not to stop it too often here, but she is really struggling with this one simple question, isn't she?
Well, put it this way. That is the question, isn't it? Because if she admits that she said that in front of Penny Bernstein or in front of Kosarik or in front of Jean Couchet, then that sets up the entire scenario that they were targeting Stephen from an early, very early time point. So Dvorak is not silly. She knows that. So notice how she said, I think I may have said it at the sheriff's department, i.e., after all the drawings have been done, after the identifications have been done, she's no way going to point her finger at Kosarik, because she knows that if she does that, They're all going down.
You know, if you think about the context, why would she say that after everything's put away? It doesn't really fit a logical event that, you know, after all this is done and put away, then she says, you know, sounds like Stephen Avery. After basically you've closed the case file, close the door, move over back to a different place, and then you say it out of context.
Correct.
It doesn't make sense.
You're right. But not only that, Jeff, we have other people that were deposed who were actually there in the room with them. And those officers definitely said, yep, it was Dvorak who said it. So we get from other people's testimonies what actually transpired. And I tell you what, you have to spend several hours to work out exactly what took place in that emergency room, because none of the guys that were in that emergency room will tell you clearly what took place. They're trying to say, I was in the room, I wasn't in the room, I was over there at the time. No one wants to associate themselves with the statement, I think it's Stephen Avery, because they know how damaging it is, right? So now they're going into a state of denial, essentially.
You made the statement that the description sounded like Stephen Avery. You just don't remember whether you said it at the hospital or whether you said it at the sheriff's department later on.
I'm going to object to that.
Is that correct?
Because that's not what she said. And I object to the
Why
form.
don't you guys all just get sworn and testify here? Let the witness answer, Mr. Collins.
I'm not stopping the witness from answering.
You're trying to tell her what to say.
When you said this and she didn't say that, I'm going to object to make sure that the record is correct.
For us, the Attorney General's report was a blessing in that at least some of the people who were being questioned did not anticipate any personal liability to themselves, felt like they were talking law enforcement to law enforcement, and so were fairly candid. So that was very helpful to us in terms of the discovery that we needed to conduct of those people in the civil suit environment, by which time they did know about civil liability, but we already had their remarks down in investigatory reports. And then the statement says, Dvorak described Avery as such a dirty man that every time he would come to the jail, the sheriff's deputies would have to make Avery take a shower. Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
Did you tell that to Ms. Strauss?
Possibly, but not in those words.
In what words? Do you remember the words you told her?
I'm going to object to the form of the question.
Okay.
I do not remember specifically, but reading this is not my words.
Well, if you don't remember, how can you tell us that?
Objection argumentative. Go ahead, ma'am.
You can answer.
I would say I do not speak or converse in this kind of verbiage.
Well, we actually had instances where people attempted to change what they had said to the investigators for the Attorney General's office when we were deposing them. And of course, we could produce the investigatory reports and say, this report says you said thus and so.
She may have taken the words out of context.
Yeah. So, a lot of people talk about, conspiracies. That can't happen. Well, what you're witnessing here is a cover-up of one. And you're seeing it playing out in real time, how they had all documents. They were talking to the lead investigators, and they would have had a look at their own statements to go over what they've written, what they talked about. They would have signed their own statements. And now, because they're under the spotlight, they all of a sudden cannot remember saying anything. And for Dvorak to say, not my verbiage, truly, your head's got to shake, guys. It really does. It's mind-blowing that someone will be so stupid as to stoop that low to say, no, I don't recall saying that. And yet it's right in her report.
And I absolutely love the part where he says, well, how do you know you didn't say it like that if you can't remember what you said? You say you can't remember what you said, but you know you didn't say it like that. How do you know that you didn't say it like that if you can't remember what you said?
Yeah, it's remember, these are professional law enforcement, or they're meant to be professional law enforcement officers, and they honestly look like a bunch of idiots. Not good.
The level of digging that Deb Strauss and Amy Lehman did as they were compiling these was not very deep when it gets right down to it. So if they picked up something, they wrote it down, I would imagine, reasonably close, or a reasonable paraphrase. So I don't think she has a leg to stand on. We haven't even really addressed the white elephant in the room, which is when she says, "Oh, that sounds like Stephen Avery." What exact part of it sounds like Stephen Avery? Because the physical description was so wrong with regard to the height and the weight and the eye color, that what part of it sounds like this guy who it isn't?
It almost sounds like it's become a inside joke at the jail. Oh, we got a call about a burglary. Ha, sounds like Stephen Avery. Oh, we got a call for graffiti on. Sounds like Stephen Avery. And that's kind of what it seems like to me, that anytime there was anything beyond a speeding ticket, you could insert sounds like Stephen Avery.
Yeah, especially if you're good friends with Sandra Morris, right? Who is the one that's.
And Dvorak and Sandra lived fairly close to where Stephen was. So, they would have always been in each other's hair, so to speak. So, unfortunately, Stephen had become the whipping boy. Anything. I believe there was a case in which a young 11-year-old girl, I think, got sexually assaulted. And I'm sure that there were rumors going around that it was actually Stephen, which is truly mind-blowing. He looks like Stephen was responsible for all the crimes that were taking place.
I think this came up last week. Maybe Kelly, you were the one that mentioned it, and that there had been instances of them trying to find something to stick to Stephen earlier. Go ahead, Kel, if you wanted to back up on that.
Yeah, exactly what Silkman was saying. His name circled when there was a young girl that was taken and found and dropped off near like a river or a lake or something from a man in a van, some kind of brown van, and it came out, oh, that sounds like Stephen Avery. There is documentation around that. I have to scoop it up, but yeah, there is something that I can provide that kind of shows where that was leading, but it got dropped because it wasn't Stephen Avery.
No.
What context?
I mean, let's face it, Jeff. My opinion is it was a setup from the very beginning, and it was this was not a case of police myopia. It was, I don't care who did this. We're pitting this on Stephen Avery. This is a gem from heaven that fell into our hands, and we're going to use it to put him in jail. And it's just obvious that they knew it wasn't him, and they pursued it anyway. It was not a case of myopia. It was a case of malfeasance.
There are to wiggle out of prior statements, the weaker become the rationalizations. So we now know that the person Mrs. Bernstein described to you was Gregory Allen, right?
No.
No?
No.
Well, we know that Gregory Allen was the assailant of Mrs. Bernstein because the DNA has shown that.
Well, you know that. I don't know that. I don't take what's in the paper as gospel truth, believe me.
Well, do you take DNA evidence that's been done by the state crime lab and become the basis for vacating let me finish. Vacating a judgment of conviction of Stephen Avery? Is that enough for you to know that Stephen Avery did not commit this assault?
No. Where did the evidence come from? That's all I'm asking.
You're saying you doubt the DNA examination because
that it was match? I believe there was a match.
Okay. So you
has DNA evidence been fabricated before? Yes.
You think that happened here?
Yeah, I'm just sorry, but to stop it so soon. But the double standard, look at his face, the double standard of DNA evidence. He's basically laying out a case for 2005. DNA evidence has been fabricated before.
Yep. I remember seeing that for the very first time, and That was an embedded confession right there, because we all know, and Big Jeff will back me up, and same with Kelly, that when people are providing evidence, one of the strongest pieces of evidence, forensic evidence that you can have, is DNA, because people get the impression that, okay, I found DNA at the scene. It means that the potential suspect was there. He's got to be guilty. And that goes to show the power of DNA. Now, for someone as senior as Jean Couchet to say, has DNA evidence been fabricated before? Yes, it has. You know, that's pointing directly to the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory right there.
Otherwise, how would he have this knowledge?
That's correct. And you know who the main laboratory tech is in the Wisconsin State Crime Lab? Big
Can I
Jeff?
guess? Can I, Jeff? Go ahead.
Does she have hair like a helmet?
Yeah. My ex-girlfriend.
Dr. Silkman's nemesis. It's your personal nemesis, I think.
So, you know, when you have the likes of Cherie Cohen in charge of forensic evidence, and it's just remarkable how she put up her own hand and said, look, I'm gonna be the lead DNA tech in the Stephen Avery, Teresa Halbach case. It really does make you raise your eyebrows, right? Because we know that lab techs can be corrupt and cause all sorts of chaos and mayhem. So for Jean Couchet, who's a senior MTSO officer, to even doubt where the forensic evidence came from, oh boy, guys, that's a big red flag right there.
Absolutely, Dr. Silkman. And I think, you know, another different words to say embedded confession. If you think about who was kind of would have been in the inner circle to mastermind the framing of Stephen Avery, right? Somebody who is at least cognizant of the fact that he got off on DNA evidence. So we're going to need something absolutely ironclad. And this guy fully admits that DNA, he knows probably DNA is probably going to need to be part of the framing solution. And he's thinking about it. This interview says he's thinking about it. He understands that stuff can be put there to solidify or not, you know, the mind of the court, if you will. So he's thinking about it. And I think that your words were embedded confession, which is great. And there's just a whole other level that can be taken to.
Just out of curiosity, I just want to clear something up as well, because I think I've got a bit of a timeline wrong here when I found my documents. Does anyone know the exact date that on the top of their heads, what day Penny was attacked by Gregory Allen?
No, I've got about 50 pages of notes on that, but they're not with me at the moment. But if you go to the Foul Play website, we've actually got everything, or a lot of the documentation in the 1985 case, including the MTSO report. It's about 96 pages, and it documents essentially what happened, the time, the date, the crime, everything is there.
So I only asked because I do know. I just was going to wait for that. But anyway, she was attacked on the 29th of July of 1985. That little girl accusation actually happened the day before Penny was attacked, that they were trying to pin Stephen for her.
Oh my God.
It didn't happen after he got out of jail. It was the day before Penny got attacked.
So his name was already being bandied about.
Yep. So Penny got attacked on the 29th of July. And then on the 30th of July of 1985, I have the documents, I will provide it. It says on the 30th of July at 1400 hours, upon reading a statement made out by Mrs. Wayne Marcel of, and then there's the address. I'm not going to repeat it because I'm not sure the boundaries that we have with releasing things. But anyway, it says, statement was in reference to the arrest of Stephen Avery on the 29th of the 7th. Shortly after the incident took place, a part of the statement is as followed. I don't know if this is relevant, but during the Memorial Day weekend, there was an 11-year-old girl taken, my mother-in-law, Mrs. Amanda of, and then the address and phone number is all blacked out, was fishing in the high falls. Sorry, it's really small writing here. High Falls area during the Memorial Day weekend and identified Stephen Avery fishing in the area. She also said she also saw a brown van. The fact that she saw Stephen Avery and the brown van has been bothering her since he saw the brown van in his yard several weeks ago. So there's the timeline as well. So I just wanted to clear that up because I thought I might have been coming across that this incident happened with the little girl after he was released from the Penny wrongful conviction, but this was happened before the Penny. So I just wanted to clear that.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
It was definitely important, both before the Penny trial and before the Teresa Halbach trial, to try and pin these unwarranted sexual crimes of which there's no evidence on Stephen. He didn't, right? They had to make him seem, like a sexual predator, which there's, he did a lot of shitty things, but sex crimes wasn't one of them.
And you know where this is alluding to, of course, that Peg Lockenschlatter had to come up with some type of reason and excuse for how all these incredibly smart MTSO officers got Stephen Avery wrong. So, in other words, she's trying to provide justification for them pointing a finger at Stephen Avery. And again, it comes back to the sexual assault component. Look, he was a petty criminal, and as Big Jeff alluded to, he was no angel, but rape, sexual assault on an open beach in broad daylight. Now, that wasn't his MO. That was the MO of Gregory Allen. So they're trying to, Peg and the others were trying to morph Gregory Allen into Stephen Avery, which is completely ridiculous.
You're exactly right. And I just keep going back to what Couchet just said, that, well, DNA evidence has been fabricated before. But in this case, in order to get Stephen out, that means that someone working for Stephen Avery somehow got a pubic hair from Gregory Allen, and somehow that pubic hair was placed inside the rape kit for Penny.
Yeah, which is actually goes worse than that. Those pubic hairs, I believe, were under a microscope slide that were prepared by Cherie Culhane, right? So how in the hell are they going to potentially plant Gregory Allen's pubic hair in a forensic bag that's sealed with evidence tape and had no signs of being opened, right? The mere factor that Jean Couchet can come up with pure, unadulterated, weapon grades bullshit like that into a civil suit attorney, it just makes you shake your head to realize, it makes you shake your head to realize how incredibly shady the entire department was, and how many people were sitting in prison wrongfully that never did any crime, but because of these idiots fabricating evidence, there are people probably sitting in prison that have done nothing wrong. They were targeted like Stephen was.
The DNA examination, because
That it was match? I believe there was a match.
So you
has DNA evidence been fabricated before? Yes.
You think that happened here?
I don't know.
So you actually think that your sketch is more valid evidence than the DNA evidence that's inculpated Gregory Allen?
My drawing was the result of what image she had in her head. That's what that is. I'm just the pencil.
That's right.
I'm just the pencil.
That. Okay.
My sketch looks more like Stephen Avery than it does Gregory Allen.
Right. That's right.
Right. Exactly. Your sketch looks more like Stephen Avery than, and he's trying to use that as a defense. We proved it or at least I think we proved it in the previous episodes that he traced this. Of course, it's going to look more like Stephen Avery than Gregory Allen.
Yeah, that's another classic embedded confession, because he had the jail photograph either underneath the tracing paper or right next to it, and he merely copied it. And then, to make the argument, when Penny had a look at it, she goes, no, the nose doesn't look right. What does that tell you? That's why you can see that there are changes to the nose, because he just rubbed it out and tried to readjust the nose. But 99.99% of that picture is identical to Stephen's arrest photo when he got arrested for the Sandra Morris incident, right? Which is completely different. His hair, his looks is completely different to when he just now got arrested. So it's sad, but individuals like Jean Couchet exist. This guy is lying directly to a civil suit attorney, and repeatedly so.
Right.
One of the realities in this kind of litigation for somebody like Steve Avery, who has no money, who's never had money, is that the insurance companies would get together and say, here's $1 million, walk away from this case. What could we possibly do to prevent Steve from having that happen? I want to share with you, how happy we were when we realized that he was very, very close to having 400 grand put in his hand, which removes all of the incentive to take a lowball settlement. He could then afford to stay in the lawsuit as long as it took.
I'm doing good. I've been working every day almost, waiting for Jody to get out. She got locked up, drinking, driving. So I hollered at Jody quite a few times to stop drinking. I guess it sunk into her because she did stop, and she's a different person now. I gotta give her a lot of credit. When Jody gets out, hopefully we can set a wedding date.
We learned during litigation something we had absolutely no knowledge of before that lawsuit got started, that 1995 was a very, very significant point in this thing.
We're on the record. We're continuing depositions in the case of Avery versus...
And that there is not only something to this idea that law enforcement had information about somebody else, but there is serious meat on those bones. I mean, serious meat. What we learn is that while Stephen Avery is sitting in prison now for a decade, a telephone call comes in to the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department from another law enforcement agency, which at least one of the officers involved in that process believes to be the Brown County Sheriff's Department, saying that they had someone in custody who said that he had committed an assault in Manitowoc, and an assault for which somebody was currently in prison.
You've gone over Exhibit 138.
Yes, sir.
It describes you receiving a telephone call 1994 or 1995 from someone who identified himself as a detective, correct?
Yes.
The detective indicated that there was a person in custody who had made a statement about a Manitowoc County offense, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And what that person in custody had said was that he had committed an assault in Manitowoc County and someone else was in jail for it, correct?
Yes, sir.
Manitowoc doesn't have huge numbers of major assaults where people go to prison, and certainly where people would still be in prison. There is a very distinct possibility, I would say likelihood, that it's Gregory Allen, it's the Brown County Sheriff's Department that is in 1995 on the Gregory Allen case, that Gregory Allen has said something about Stephen Avery, and at a minimum, somebody ought to check this out.
I mean, that's a significant event.
Right.
I just want to ask the panel, out of curiosity, what made you think that Gregory Allen came forward to admit on his own accord that he was the one that attacked Penny? Do you think it was out of like a guilty conscience that another man was serving time for him? Or do you think it was because his ego, he couldn't handle that someone else was getting his glory? I just find that I just want to hit base with that now, because as we go along and when we hit the Teresa story, I want to circle back to this moment. So
Number one,
out of curiosity, what do you think?
do we know who he was talking to specifically? We don't.
Well, the impression I get is that Gregory Allen directly spoke to the officer who said, I committed this crime and there's someone in prison in Manitowoc serving the time for it. So otherwise the guy wouldn't have called. And it's too coincidental that Gregory Allen just happens to be arrested on that date. Gregory Allen tells the officer and the officer phones up Colburn, right, from Brown County. So it all appears coincidental. But to answer Kelly's question, this is also a way for Gregory Allen to embarrass Kacerek and Vogel.
Interesting.
So it's kind of a brag in a way.
Yes, the guy's a complete psychopath.
He is. Yeah, I see it almost as akin to calling your victim. Right. This is sort of his last chance to call up his victim. It's sort of kind of a sick remote thing that he all of a sudden is going to get the chance to potentially be tried for that assault, have to face that victim again. He got off on that a little bit, right? He phoned up his victims after he
that's what he did. He phoned. You're right.
And this is like some in addition to all the other things that were said, this could be a way for him to just sort of in some weird way make another one of those phone calls. And
correct.
Secondly, I think it's not clear to me. He said that the day that he was arrested. I thought he said that after he had been convicted and had served time for a while, and he was like, okay, well the jig is up and I'm out of options to satiate my psychopathic needs here.
I'm sure there's got to be a report of it. The exact date and time when Gregory Allen had said that, but also think of it of another way, right? Instead of him ringing up his victim to gloat, he rang up the very people that didn't arrest him in '85. So in effect, he's saying to Kacerek and Vogel and everybody else, okay, you got me this time, but you're going to go down as well, right? Because now it's on record. It's on record now.
And the other thing I go back to is the fact that whoever he said it to, obviously there was a law enforcement officer in Brown County who felt that this story, that there was something there. It wasn't just him, oh yeah, I raped this woman and somebody else. He must have felt that there was validity to the story. Otherwise he would have never made the call.
There's also a possibility, we mustn't forget, he may have mentioned Penny Bernstein by name. So that would have really sent up the red flag in that officer in Brown County.
The fellow who got that call is named Colbert. And you might say that there should be a record of him immediately making a report on this. There might be a record of his immediately contacting a supervising officer. There might be a record of him contacting a detective who handles sexual assault cases. There might be some record of it. But if you thought any of those things, you'd be wrong, because there isn't any record in 1995, 1996, 1997, 1998, 1999, 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003. Now, 2003 is a year that has meaning because that's when Stephen Avery got out. And the day he got out, or the day after, that's when Colburn decides to contact his superior officer named Link. And Link tells him to write a report. And they then go have contact with the sheriff. Now, let's just stop and think about that for a minute. Why does that happen? Why does it happen then when it didn't happen 8 years earlier? I mean, I think I know the answer. I mean, I think the answer is pretty clearly these people realized that they had screwed up big time. Colburn realized it, Lenk as his superior realized it, and the sheriff realized it. So Lenk tells Colburn to write a report. The sheriff tells Lenk, get me the report. The sheriff puts the report in a safe. That's how much he cares about documenting this thing. Well, obviously, it doesn't do anybody, it certainly doesn't do Steve Avery any good to document that 8 years after the fact, because Steve Avery has been sitting in a cage for those 8 years.
Okay, he does say timeout, and I think I need to take a timeout because what I still have trouble understanding the logic behind filing this report 8 years later. If you want to deny that this happened, why write a report about it? I still can't quite, and maybe you guys can walk me through this. I still can't quite understand why did Lenk want him to file this when they could just say, I don't recall.
Well, for a start, if I could just say very quickly, sorry, Big Jeff.
Sure.
For a start, I had no idea what had happened at Brown County, right? Whether they actually had some type of record at Brown County. So what is disturbing here is that despite Colburn writing the report one day after Stephen gets released, it's placed in a safe. So potentially that could be used as leverage if the shit goes down, so to speak, right? Because he puts it in the safe. He's got now leverage against Colburn, right? So it's, the time to have acted was back in 1995, not the day after Stephen is released.
I think you did kind of clear it up there, Dr. Silkman, because the fact that Brown County could potentially have the record of this phone call being made was probably enough to scare them into writing this. It's such an important plot point in this entire story. Does anybody else have anything to add to it before we move on?
So, I mean, I totally agree with Dr. Silkman. It's exactly how it would have answered the question, that they didn't know what they had in Brown County or what they might have been able to lay their hands on. My question is this the point where Colburn panics and, sort of falls in with the conspiracy to say, oh my God, in the same way that Judy Dvorak was obviously uncomfortable and panicking, if it can be shown that you are the one that sort of initiated, some important component of this wrongdoing through your incompetence or malfeasance or nonfeasance, in the case of Colburn, it was nonfeasance, then you have to wonder if at some point, Stephen can name you individually, right? I mean, what's stopping Stephen? And if he's naming people individually, finds out that somebody like Colburn, if it, say for example, he just Colburn's eye didn't even bother to report that to anybody else, he could potentially even name him as an individual in the suit going forward. So is this the time that he panics and says, "Oh my God, it could be my ass could be fried right here." So I do think that that's the case. I think that the documentary really found the correct villain in Colburn and Link.
This document didn't begin to get prepared until after you had talked to Sheriff Peterson. Is that a fair statement?
Correct.
This indicates that Colburn said he was formed by someone in 95, 96, but the case was already solved and the right person was arrested. True?
True.
Sergeant Colburn couldn't recall who it was that told him that the case had already been solved. True?
True. That's what he told me.
Did he make any guesses about that, or say, gee, it could have been this person, it could have been that person, I'm not sure?
He wasn't sure.
You recognize Exhibit 125.
That's one of the Sheriff's Department statement forms, and it looks like James Lang's signature on it.
Okay, and have you seen this document before?
No.
Okay, and how about 138, which is well, you tell me what it is.
Yeah, that's another one of our statement forms. Looks like it was filled out by Andrew Colburn.
And again, have you seen that document before today?
No.
But a lot of people told me to watch my back. Most of the time I didn't even believe them. But then sitting and doing depositions, I don't know, it kind of changed my mind. They were covering something up. And they were still covering something up. Even with those sheriff who's on there now, is covering something up.
Have you ever had any conversations with anybody else other than Sheriff Peterson and Lieutenant Link about the subject matter of Exhibit 138? Ever discuss it with anyone else? Any other officers, any friends, any family?
Not that I can specifically recall. I may have mentioned it to other people, but I don't recall doing it.
At the time that you received information from the crime lab telling you that Gregory Allen was inculpated in the sexual assault of Mrs. Bernstein, did you have conversation with any people in the sheriff's office?
Yes.
Who were they?
Andy Colburn. And Jim Link.
Look at the body language, though, on the side of him. I think that would be like the attorney. He keeps looking at him with his eyes up, like rocking back and forth, going, "Oh my fucking God. The name
Yep.
you just dropped, you fucking idiot." When I used to watch this, I always thought this guy right here could be a squealer if they twisted his nipples just a little bit harder. I always thought he had the potential. I always thought he had the potential to whistleblow to a degree, this bloke. He knew he was in a bit of a pickle, and it was sink or swim, fight or flight for him, and I think he would have buckled. He's putting it out there.
I'm trying to recall what role he might have played in 1985 per se. What I can say for sure is that he is he is the Manitowoc County DA, sort of at the time of the documentary, and he's the one that solicited the state DOJ to do that investigation and write that report. I'm not sure what individual culpability he has. I'm not sure why he's so nervous. Because he'd heard those things. He's almost a whistleblower here, as opposed to being one of the conspirators.
That's exactly what exactly my point. That's how I'm feeling.
Oh, I see what you're saying now. I see what you're saying. Okay.
But I'm just looking at the body language next to him, and I'm cracking up laughing, just like, have a go at him. He's just like, and the mouth covering. I'm not obviously a body language expert, but I think we've all have seen enough to, all these programs of true crime that we've kind of got like a baseline, and the covering of the mouth is usually like a shut up, seal your mouth, stop it.
Yep.
Again,
Kratz
it's just
used to do it all the time. Kratz used to put his finger across his nose to sort of tell the witness, shut the fuck up and don't say any more. But I agree with you. Mark Rohrer is definitely the weakest link. And you could tell, we read his deposition. He's got the highest record number of I don't recall. So he basically doesn't recall when he can't recall. That's how bad his deposition was.
Wow. And we just, I had said previously to stopping to this, talking about Colburn, did you talk to anyone else other than Link and Peterson about this? I can't recall. And then the next person we see here is Mark Rohr, who says, yeah, I talked to Andy about that.
And that's why the guy beside him is thinking, holy shit, dude, you just dropped a bomb. Like, we just had Andy say no. And he's like, boo, 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 I'll give you names. I'll even give you a Starbucks card with it. Like, here, straight up, straight out.
The DA just threw you under the bus. Go plant the key.
Receive. Let me show you what's been marked as Exhibit 124. I'm familiar with the document. Okay. Who's Douglas Jones? Assistant District Attorney for Manitowoc County. All right. What is this memo to your understanding? It speaks for itself. He had a telephone conversation with Jean Couchet about the case. This document reflects a conversation between you and Douglas Jones shortly after it became public knowledge that Stephen Avery had been exculpated and that Gregory Allen had been inculpated, right? That's correct. All right. He says, as Doug Jones, was trying to close the conversation, you told him that in 95 or 96, Andy Colburn had told Manitowoc County Sheriff Tom Kusorek that an officer from Brown County had told Colburn that Allen and not Avery might have actually committed the Bernston assault. Okay? Did you in fact tell that to Douglas Jones?
I don't recall.
And so here's another party. Remember, we just said Andrew Colburn. Did you talk to anybody else about this? And then we just said he talked to Mark Rohr about it, and now we have proof that he talked to Jean Couchet about it.
All right. Does seeing this document 124 refresh your recollection?
My recollection of this conversation, which is not very strong, was that Colburn made a comment to me about getting some information.
Yeah.
And okay. I related it in the phone.
The statement goes on and says, the next sentence says, Jean stated, that's you, that Colburn was told by Kusorek something to the effect that we already have the right guy and he should not concern himself. Now, did Colburn tell that to you?
I don't recall it.
Do you have any reason to believe that Doug Jones would misrecord what you told him?
No.
Okay. Then it goes on to say that Doug Jones asked you if this information was known. Do you remember him asking you that?
No.
Then it goes on to say that you said Lenk, MTSO Lieutenant James Lenk, Detective Bureau Command Officer, was aware. Did you tell that to Doug Jones?
If he put it there, I probably did.
And what was the basis for your knowledge about that?
It would have been from Andy Colburn.
This was unconscionable withholding of information that would have been of use to Stephen Avery's lawyers, who were right at that time in the middle of litigation asserting, based on the fingernail scraping, that there may have been somebody else involved in this. If that information had come to light in 1995, Stephen Avery would have gotten out in 1995.
How creepy was it that Kusorek was in the courtroom listening to Judge Hazelwood? He was there.
Yep.
So he knows
sure
what's happening. Yeah.
Had come to light in 1995, Stephen Avery would have gotten out in 1995. So they cost Stephen Avery 8 years of his life. This is as close to a conspiracy of silence as I think you could find in a case.
Did you provide this information to the Attorney General's office?
Yes, my recollections is I believe we did.
And who's we?
Mike Griesbach and I when we went to Madison.
Well, but this memo is, was drafted after you had been to Madison.
I'm not sure the date we're in Madison.
You're saying you told that information to the Attorney General's office?
We passed everything we had obtained to the Attorney General's office.
Okay, well, neither this memo nor anything about Colburn and Link is in any of the records that were provided to the Attorney General's office. I can tell you that.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the true definition of sweating.
I was just going to say, getting a little squirmy there, aren't we, Mark?
Yeah, we'll have to look and see what what year Mark Rohr was first Attorney General. And are they talking about this wasn't passed as part of the are they saying that as part of the the 1995 review that they're talking about right now, or part of the PEG whitewash that it wasn't handed over? Yeah.
I think it's part of the PEG whitewash. So PEG would not have been aware. Yeah, she wouldn't have been aware of the shenanigans going on with Link, Colburn, and Brown County.
And if I am understanding this correctly, Mark Rohr in real time is realizing I really messed up by not including that.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Because now I'm part of the conspiracy. Now I'm part. It doesn't matter anything up before it happened to me, anything that happened before this. Now I'm part of it because I didn't include that in the documents when I handed everything over to the next level up.
Yeah,
part of the whitewash would be more accurate probably if he didn't hand it up to. But I can tell you for a fact that that both Amy Lehman and Deb Strauss were asked, "Did you go talk to Mark Rohr, who's the one who kicked this off?" And they said, "No, we did not go talk to him to find out why he wanted this investigation kicked off." Of course, that's the lack of intellectual curiosity on their part. So, he provided all that information to them. If this was left out, that's bad, but it's not necessarily as bad as being part of the conspiracy. It's part of the whitewash.
Yeah. So, in essence, if you go back to 1985, you now have. There's no doubt there was deliberate targeting of Stephen Avery, and now if you look back at what happened in 1995, you've now got a cover-up of a conspiracy, right? And I bet you the civil suit attorneys could not believe with what they saw, read, and are hearing. So now you had a dual issue for the state. They were caught red-handed and lying about it.
The question is, I was going to say before, if this was handed over to PEG, the question for me would be, would it have still changed her outcome? Because her outcome was basically victim blaming and whitewashing it all away. If she had this information, could that have altered her final decision?
Well, I think Kelly, you
break that.
Well, now you've got the introduction of two additional individuals who had knowledge, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So Colburn had prior knowledge in 1995, and the situation here is, if they followed their proper due diligence, could Stephen have gotten 8 years out earlier? That's the issue.
Yeah, if you pull up the view graph that we showed last week, the objective of the investigation was to determine whether there was any malfeasance or criminal activity, you could argue that not reporting this, that's certainly non-feasance, right? There's no definition that no question that it rises to the definition of non-feasance, but does it rise to malfeasance? It would be up to somebody making that decision. And we like to throw PEG under the bus, right? Because ultimately she signed this, but the real person who sort of was the conductor behind the assembly of the report, Tom Fallon. Tom Fallon essentially was the one who made the call that we're going to turn this into a whitewash. We're not He could have taken the opposite approach and said, we're going to blow it all up. But that's not what he did. He went down the whitewash route, and the people after him are the ones that, rubber stamped his presentation of it. So that's the way it went.
October of 2005, from the perspective of the Manitowoc County government and their defense lawyers, I believe they all knew that they were in the most serious kind of trouble. That there was a very grave prospect of a very, very substantial verdict. Manitowoc County and the sheriff and the district attorney are arguably covered by insurance policies, and there's a good half dozen insurance policies. However, the insurers have taken the position that because of the nature of the allegations against the county, the sheriff, and the DA, the policies do not cover, which would mean that Manitowoc County itself and the sheriff and the DA would be on the hook for those damages in that civil suit.
We don't need to have somebody tell us that this is going to have an effect on law enforcement. Of course it has an effect on law enforcement. Are you kidding me? I mean, law enforcement officers get uptight when there's even a suggestion that they have said something wrong in a courtroom. Imagine what it's like when you're going to say that you're a liar and that you hid evidence and that you deliberately prosecuted a person that you knew, or at least had reason to know, wasn't guilty of the crime. And putting all that aside, by the way, in terms of your own professionalism, there's a guy out there raping and beating women while the guy that you put in prison is sitting in a cell. How's that make you feel?
I think if I could just make a comment, Jeff, that's about as worse as you can get. Honestly, targeting the wrong guy for a start, covering it up, and letting the real perpetrator, who had the exact MO of what happened to Penny, including Gregory Allen phoning her at home after the sexual assault, and the sheriff telling her, "Nah, don't worry about it, we got the right guy," right? Allowing a sexual predator like Gregory Allen to continue his craft for 10 additional years, I'm surprised there weren't even more multiple lawsuits landing at the footsteps of Kaseric and the MTSO.
Can we just timestamp that statement or comment from Dr. Silkman, because what exactly he just said, I can see that being the highlight comment and going back to it when we hit Teresa Halbach's story. So remember what you just said, Silkman, because I think that is going to play another big part once we move forward, because we're going to be left having to consider that again.
Yeah.
I'll just leave it as that. But let's just remember what Dr. Silkman said about the 1985 case and that exact part of it. So when we get to Teresa, I can definitely see that's going to be coming up again.
We were just on the absolute edge of getting ready to go after the named defendants in the case with depositions when I get a call from Walt, who tells me that he has gotten a call from a journalist asking if either of us would care to comment on the apparent intersection in life between Stephen Avery and a woman who has gone missing in the Manitowoc area, whom we later learned to be Teresa Halbach.
before we see that news report, this from just looking at the documentary, I really like how they laid out this timeline, and I think that it's really important to see this. I mean, the lawyer just said we're in the middle of deposing these people, and I get a phone call. Do you know anything about this? It's quite amazing. Does anybody have anything to add to that, to what we just saw?
Well, if I could just make a quick comment, this is the ultimate head scratcher, right? Because a lot of the guilters will say, well, look at that timing. And I respond to that, and you think about it. Stephen Avery was on the cusp, the very cusp of getting justice, right? Look at that. November the 1st, the Avery bill passes. November the 1st, right? So think about it. He was on the very cusp of getting justice to what happened to him. So now, for some unknown, bizarre, inexplicable reason, he's now going to let off the entire MTSO and Vogel, all the people that did wrong to him, by murdering a 25-year-old photographer on the cusp of both Kosarik and Vogel being deposed. That doesn't make any sense.
Tony, I could not agree more. It is just not fathomable that, given his situation, that's what he would choose to do. And I think we've been over how the state has attempted to make him seem like this predator and say, well, of course that's predator behavior. Well, that's not actually what's in his history. And just the fact that this behavior would suddenly emerge right at the perfect time is
Correct.
Just not believable.
Correct.
It's not believable.
And he would have sat on most of those depositions, right? So he would have known what had happened. Now, is he now going to commit? And it wasn't just a murder. Oh my God, Teresa Halbach was dismembered and cremated, right? So where did all of a sudden this sudden rage come from to let off Kosarik and Vogel and the entire MTSO? I don't think so.
Right, like rage would be more directed towards the police department, not some innocent photographer. I mean, I'm sorry not to get in the head of a murderer, but if you are trying to seek revenge, wouldn't you do it on someone who wronged you?
Yes.
100%. And you know what? Could you imagine him standing outside the MTSO, right? Say the Halbach murder didn't take place. How damaging would it have been to have had a film crew interview Stephen in front of the MTSO with a fistful of dollars? I mean, Lord help him. They would have come out there and shot him.
I just wanted to say, let's flip that though and play the devil's advocate, because that's what I do. The timeline, I totally agree with Dr. Silkman. He summed it up perfectly. When I look at that timeline, it's in your face, it's so clear and it's so direct. And he gave the most plausible explanation to why we all know Stephen Avery wouldn't have committed this crime. He was, again, we don't even think it was about the money. It was about making the people that took away his life pay, basically. Shut them down. And it was about to happen. Why would he risk all that? However, the reason why I want to highlight the other side to it is it only is significant in effect if the cops killed her. And I say that because if they didn't, this really is then a coincidence that this has happened in this time frame if they had nothing to do with her actual death. Because then how would you explain it any other way? So I just wanted to say that unless you really think that the cops killed her, then as much as it is an absolute head scratcher, again, it is a coincidence in timing, because if they didn't do it, who did and why? Why this time? You got to also remember, and I know I might be jumping the gun here, this couldn't have been planned per se about Teresa Halbach's death in advance to a degree, because not even Stephen Avery knew Stephen Avery was going to have the appointment with Teresa until it was confirmed at 11 o'clock that day. So if they were listening in, which I will touch base on that later probably, but tap phones, whatever, and why I don't think that was happening, or whether the Avery yard was being watched potentially, that would have had to been on a very, very quick turnover, because no one even knew she was coming that day until 12 in the morning when he made the original phone call, and didn't get confirmed she was coming until 11 that day. So from 11 to 2:30, that's the only time it was on, like the sliding doors had begun for Stephen Avery. Just wanted to leave that with you.
Oh, well, here's the ultimate issue, and I really like Kelly's comment. If you're going to give the law enforcement slack, you also give the same slack to Stephen Avery, right? It's quid quo pro. Basically, what applies to law enforcement applies to Stephen, right? Why would law enforcement murder a 25-year-old photographer? It makes no sense. Why would Stephen Avery murder a 25-year-old photographer just to let off the civil suit and potentially blow up to $36 million and see justice being done? That makes no sense either. Yeah, if I could just make the quick comment, I don't believe law enforcement had anything to do with killing Teresa Halbach.
That makes
we don't know where the crime ended and the frame job began, and I unfortunately don't think we will ever know that. But what I personally believe is that that there was some type of tragedy exploited. Whether that tragedy was a murder or something else more accidental, we'll never know.
This is Action 2 News at 5. Coverage you can count on.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. The Calumet County Sheriff says the disappearance of Teresa Halbach remains a mystery tonight.
The 25-year-old was last seen Monday afternoon in Manitowoc County. Right now, police are conducting an aerial search of the land from Manitowoc to Green Bay. They're hoping to locate Teresa's car, which they say is a major key in their investigation. That car is a 1999 dark green Toyota RAV4, just like the one you see here. Jeff Alexander has the latest in the investigation.
Halbach is a professional.
Did you have something, Jeff?
Kelly, what color they say that car was? I think I missed it.
We're not going there. We're not going to turn Jeff Jones's podcast into a mockery of the case. I've done a very extensive timeline, and I can't wait to share it with you all. And it's a really big breakdown, and it's really interesting to see the conclusion. I can't wait to show you. But actually, I do think that the reason why they're highlighting the car is because it is the beginning and the start of her victimology. By the time they get the case, it has been confirmed that at this stage, very quickly into the investigation, that the last place she was seen wasn't at home, wasn't at the shops. It was on the road in her car doing jobs for Auto Trader. So I think they originally, it's like when you lose your key, you go back to the first place you remember seeing it. And I think that's for the car. They're thinking, we know she was in the car last. Everyone places her with her car. You find the car, you will find Teresa, because we know that's an object, a big vessel that she was with. It started in her victimology, and it will continue throughout her victimology. And it comes very apparent, very, very, very early, that is her timeline. That is part of her narrative. She's doing a job for Auto Trader. It gets not confirmed by one person. It gets confirmed by 3 appointments, Auto Trader themselves, people that know her friends who know her schedules. So everyone places Teresa with her vehicle in the afternoon of the 31st on a Monday. That's why it's so significant to her victimology at the very beginning.
Cool. So I understand the connection there. and one of the phone calls that we had listened to, I think it was a recent open mic. I'm not sure whether it was Lenk or somebody else who said, if her vehicle's there, she's close by. You'll find her body too, right?
Yeah.
So that connection was made immediately. You find a vehicle.
But where's the logic behind that? They're just saying that they don't know that for sure. And I know of instances where cars are found and the victim isn't, you know? So
correct.
That's the part that is fishy to me.
I think it's for them. It's the connecting key factor for her. You, like Dr. Sutton said, you find her. You'll either find her close, or you'll find maybe a clue to where she could have gone next.
Correct.
But right now, her car is a lot easier to spot than a body that could be burnt somewhere, buried, and never seen again, because it's harder to hide a vessel that big versus a body or a missing person that could have been injured somewhere. I'm going to stop it there. I want to get into the rest of it as we go along, but there's a few things that this is gonna get bigger because there's so much detail as we're going along now, because we're creeping more and more into Teresa, that the detail that we have found out now from what we have from this documentary is so important and significant. And this is what this podcast is about, right? It's now adding what we know from this documentary and following a timeline now in the now.
That's right.
So I think it's going to get really, really more detailed, because we've got so much to pack in every part of her timeline, because we're about to hit her timeline, and we've only, look at us, we're hitting just the RAV. Wait till we get to the actual, main part.
That's
Holy crap.
Correct. The other important point is that nowhere on that vehicle description is the damage blinker light.
Amen to that.
That's right.
Which is a rather obvious thing to look for.
And the thing is too that call it a mockery, Kelly, but in I've never seen a picture of Teresa's car, and I realize she has a very odd paint on her car, where it looks that green. So if you're asking people to make reports and try and find a car that's that color, when you come across her car, it's not going to be that color. So is that a deliberate obfuscation?
Well, it would have been a deliberate one from the law enforcement. This is where you can actually backdate and blame Karen, because she's the person that initially gives that description, and they're basing that off what she said. So I agree. The car that they use as a reference is stupid. It's not even the same color. I agree.
That's forest green. Yeah.
That is definitely forest green. But again, at this stage, they are going off very early into this investigation, and that was Karen's call, which she said dark green, kinda. And because there's no elaboration on this kinda, your instinct would be dark green. Someone could have just looked up dark green for the news and found that, and that's what they've used.
And we'll get to hear it, but that's a really good point, because when Pam Sturm actually laid eyes on the RAV, she was shocked. She says it's kind of blue. And that's right. It wasn't the dark green one that were meant to have found. And they only were able to clarify because I read the VIN number. Mm-hmm. But the Pam Sturm was and those pictures that Big Jeff is talking about, my God, the blue stands out beautifully. No dark green anywhere.
It does, because that's the lighting and the camera itself. Lighting, and this is, again, what we're going to get into when I was talking about specific detail as we go along with this. The detail is going to just absolutely jam-pack into just the RAV and clearing up the colour, for God's sake. We start off with a forest green, dark green, kinda, and then everyone's like, but it turns blue, and then it turns mystic teal, and then and you've got all these in-betweens, and now we have the color pictures, thanks to Mystic Jinx, of when Kelly Pitson took the photos when they went away, and it's in color. We used to have it in black and white. Now we have it in color, and you can actually see the blue in it. So the bluey green texture of that changing metallic, look. So you've got all these, and again, it comes back down to lighting. It comes down to angles. It comes down to the camera itself and the pixels. There's so many factors when we get to her actual RAV that the color is so insignificant compared to the overall details we do have. And for example, Hennebury, Know Your RAV, that he has provided that very, very detailed description and all the documents that prove it was her RAV. So let's carry on.
Yeah, I was going to say, I put up a comparison photo in Foul Play, and of the same vehicle, one was taken inside the laboratory and it's distinctively blue. The same vehicle photographed outside looked green. So it's remarkable, as you said, Kelly, lighting conditions, camera source can really play tricks on your eyes. This is a color, Mystic Teal Mica is a color that's dual tone. Depending on the angle that you look at, depending on the lighting conditions, it can appear a blue or it can appear a green. Certainly not a dark green, as was described in that photo.
Just on the topic of the RAV, one more thing before the closing comments was that the pictures that were put out on the news media actually were very effective from the perspective of they did receive quite a few calls.
That's right.
There were people looking out for it. The RAV was reported multiple times at a particular turnaround near State Highway on State Highway 147. There were people that reported seeing it, on October 31st. So, yeah, it was definitely effective. Now, whether they, people could tell a RAV4 is actually a very new car in that time frame. There weren't that many of them around. It was sort of a new car to the market. So there were a lot of cars that could possibly be mistaken. And of course, you put it on the news, everybody wants to contribute or tell anything that they could possibly know, and it ends up with it being a deluge. But it did work. There were some very good reports from that.
Do you guys have any comments just from what we did today, just to like round it off, and anybody want to add just some wrap up comments?
And again, the more we see about the 1985 case, I hope people are coming around to my opinion of it, which was it was not a case of mistaken identity. It was a case of deliberate targeting, and all the evidence that you saw unfold today said that not only was there funny business in 1985 itself with the sketchy sketch and the lineup and this looks like Stephen Avery when it doesn't fit his description hardly at all. But again, in 1995, as Stephen Avery was in front of, as Alan Avery said, the son of a bitch in Hazleton, trying to get out on the DNA case, we have these phone calls being made from Brown County to Manitowoc saying that the culprit himself, Gregory Allen, said, I did this and you might have somebody else in custody, but nothing happens. It's deliberate. We got the right guy, meaning that go away. That doesn't mean, when we say we got the right guy, that is a clear message to lay off, stop it, stop this, any other possible investigation of his innocence in its tracks. This is 100% a setup, and if they can do it once, they can do it again. Stay tuned.
Dr. Silkman?
Yeah, I just want to echo Big Jeff's comments. Potentially the state could explain. Yeah, I mean, everything revolves around the 1985 case. It's absolutely crucial. I think the way we're dealing with the episode is really good because we're delving quite deep, which is great. So we're adding further information. But, if potentially Peg could have wormed her way out of misidentification, there's no way she could explain what happened in 1985 with the phone call and the fact that it wasn't followed up. It essentially cost Stephen an additional 8 years in prison, where he should have been released then and there. And the timing of the DNA analysis that was done by Judge Hazelwood as well, that would have all played in Stephen's favour, because it would have cast reasonable doubt. Thank you.
Kelly, did you have anything?
Yeah, there's no point me echoing what the boys say. I completely 110% agree. Everything they said, I agree with the 1985 to where it was going to where we are now. I just want to change it a little bit, and I just want to shout out to all the people that we use their work for as we go along and reference things without people doing the FOIAs and doing the research that we use to fill in the blanks that we have this upcoming timeline. We wouldn't have it without these people. So I just want to thank everyone out in the community that always do constantly share and do that for us. Without that, we wouldn't have what we do now. So I just wanted to and thank you, Jeff Jones, for, again, like Dr. Silkman said, I think this is a really clever idea of breaking down Making a Murderer. We're now adding to it in very, very, very detailed format, and I think it's great.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you, Dr. Silkman and Big Jeff, for your comments. Moving forward, we got through 30 minutes of this episode today, but I think, to echo your comments, Kelly, it might start to slow down as we get into the details and we move forward. We might not be making such headway, as we really need to stop, watch other videos, insert other relevant information as we move forward. So again, thanks to the panel, and thanks for everybody listening at home. And this has been Discussing a Murderer.